Good morning, everyone. This is our 8th Grand Dialogue annual conference that we hold, and it's great to see so many people out again. We've had a full house almost every time. I'm just curious, how many of you, is this the first time you've been to Grand Dialogue? Quite a few. Good. Well, welcome. Glad to have you here. I'm going to give a little introduction about the Grand Dialogue before we introduce our speaker, primarily for those of you that haven't been here before, so you can understand what Grand Dialogue is all about, and also how this year in particular, it's related to the Grand Rapids Year of Interfaith Understanding. So my name is Doug Kinchy. I'm the project director for the Grand Dialogue and also the director of the Kaufman Interfaith Institute, which is the administrative home for the Year of Interfaith Understanding. But a little more about that in a minute. The Grand Dialogue is an interinstitutional, interdisciplinary, interfaith exploration, seeking positive ways of relating these two great ideas. The premise of the Grand Dialogue is that science and religion are the two major forces in our society. Science has a huge impact on how we live, religion, huge impact on how we behave, on our ethical understandings and the way we live. The nature of the relationship between these two great forces is of great importance in our society. The strategy of the Grand Dialogue is to bring people and institutions together to share ideas and perspectives. We seek an openness to multiple perspectives, different traditions, different disciplines, different institutions, and different individual insights, together seeking understanding and meaning. We have a number of institutional members that have been supportive at the founding of the Grand Dialogue. They include Aquinas College, Calvin College, Calvin Theological Seminary, the Catholic Information Center, Cornerstone University, Grand Valley State University, Hope College, Western Theological Seminary, and the Interfaith Dialogue Association of Grand Rapids. The goal of the Grand Dialogue is that participating organizations, each with their own perspectives, focus and message and intended audience, will come together in cooperation and affirm the willingness to be open about various issues and perspectives in a spirit of mutual respect. We affirm what one believes, but we ask also that you be open to new insights and multiple perspectives in a spirit of humility. The Grand Dialogue has been in operation for, like I said, 8 years now. And if you're interested in further information about it, I think most of you probably registered at our website, which is granddialogue.org. We also have videos of previous conferences that are on that website and other resources that might be of interest for those that want to follow up on the science and religion concerns. Our previous conferences, just to give you a flavor of what we've been doing. In 2005, we had Michael Roos talking about the issues of evolution and creation. 2006, professor from Georgetown University, John Hott, talked about Darwin, intelligence and religion, how much can evolution really explain. Phil Clayton was here in 2007 and talked about mind, body, spirit, and perspectives of how they emerge in science and religion. In 2008, Professor Howard Van Til, retired from Calvin College, talked about, is the cosmos all there is? And then we had Brian Malley from the University of Michigan talking about why do people believe in gods from the cognitive religion perspective. And then we had the Buddhist scholar Alan Wallace that talked about experience, reason, and faith, a Buddhist perspective. And last year we had Nancy Murphy from Fuller Theological Seminary, professor of philosophy there, and she spoke on Do Humans Have Souls? Perspectives from the Science and Religion. Now, before I introduce today's speaker, I want to also mention the Grand Rapids Year of Interfaith Understanding. This is a project that Kaufman Interfaith Institute began, and with the desire to have the community engaged in interfaith dialogue. Having a one-time-a-year conference we felt wasn't enough. So we went to the mayor and to the Grand Rapids Press George Hartwell said it's a great idea, and he officially declared 2012 to be the Grand Rapids Year of Interfaith Understanding. We went to the editor of the Grand Rapids Press, Paul Keep. That's back when they had a press, do you remember? And he said, yes, we want to be part of this as well, and we will support it. We had a press conference on September 12th, and that was the idea of the editor of the press. He said, rather than waiting till January to announce the 2012 Year of Interfaith Understanding, we have a team of people working on a special edition of the press for the 9/11, the 10th anniversary of 9/11. Why don't we announce your program the day after as this community's response to the 10th anniversary of 9/11? Not only do we honor and recognize the heroes and victims of that terrible day, but let's work toward a society, communities of peace and understanding. And so we did that, and so the press then gave us a front page story about the Year of Interfaith Understanding. And since that time, there have been already over 100 interfaith events in our community, and we're still building 20 of them just in the month of March alone. The Grand Rapids Year of Interfaith Understanding was organized around three councils: a congregations council with representatives from churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, and we now have over 150 people who are on the congregations council who have pledged to do something in their own congregation that is related to interfaith understanding. The Campus Council has 8 colleges, seminaries, and universities, including the ones that are sponsoring the Grand Dialogue, who are supportive of the Year of Interfaith Understanding. And the Community Council, we have gone to various community groups, everyone from World Affairs Council to the Grand Rapids Symphony to the Economic Club to theater groups, various community groups, and asked if they would include in their programming for the year something related to interfaith understanding. And 20 community organizations have agreed to do that. And you'll see in a minute just some of the things that are happening in the community. For example, after our announcement, it turned out that Hope College had already planned a critical issue symposium on exploring Islam and had 2 major Muslim figures here for that event. Western Theological Seminary had Dr. Martin Marty here to talk for a all-day conference on the presence of the religious stranger. The Symphony had 2 Sacred Dimension concerts, one at Temple Emmanuel, the Jewish Reformed temple in town, and one at the Cathedral of St. Andrew that was also tied into our Year of Interfaith Understanding. They have also announced a major interfaith piece that they're going to do as part of their classical series next November, but you'll hear more about that in the future. The Jewish Theater had a special performance of My Name is Asher Lev with an interfaith panel discussing the themes in that play. The annual Thanksgiving service, an interfaith service, also was focused around our Year of Interfaith Understanding. The Channel 35, the public television station, ran the God in America series during January and February of this month. And there were various study groups in churches and in homes that watched that series together. The Dominican Center at Marywood has established the Tuesday Table Talk every month on the 3rd Tuesday, a discussion where each small table is made up of a mixture of faith traditions, and it's been a wonderful experience. Roughly around 100 people have been attending each of those, and it's a good time to have small group discussion stimulated by some panelists from various faith traditions that get it started. There have been book discussion groups established, including the book by Mitch Albom, Have a Little Faith, the book by Peter Kreeft, Between Allah and Jesus, What Christians Can Learn from Muslims. Peter Kreeft, by the way, is a Calvin graduate and now is a professor at Boston College. The Faith Club was a story of 3 women who, after 9/11, said we need to understand our various traditions differently. A Jewish, Christian, and Muslim women got together to talk about that. And I like to mention Grand Rapids' own Faith Club, which really started 10 years prior to that, back in the 90s, when Lillian Siegel, the wife of the rabbi at Congregation of Havas Israel, Marcin Rinstra, a Christian minister, and Ghazala Munir, an active person in the Muslim community, started meeting together in an interfaith organization, which eventually grew into the Interfaith Dialogue Association. The Catholic Information Center had a cinema series dealing with film that deal with the various faith traditions. The churches in the area are running series. Here's Eastern Avenue Christian Reform, for example, that has finished up their series on understanding our neighbors. The St. Andrew's Episcopal Church has a series that's still going on. There's been a tour of the Altoid Mosque on East Paris, and just recently the Hindu temple had an open house. So there's activities going on all over, and if you want more information about that, I would encourage you to go to our Year of Interfaith Understanding website. Hopefully easy to remember. It's 2012, the year, and it's in Grand Rapids, GR. So 2012gr.org is our website. We have a calendar there that will tell you all of the activities that are in planning, and also a tab there that you can sign up for the Interfaith Inform, which is a weekly e-newsletter. Every Tuesday it comes out. We have over 2,000 people already on our e-newsletter mailing list. So if you're interested in a reminder of what's coming up in the next couple of weeks or so, sign up for Interfaith Inform at our website, 2012gr.org. Now, with that little bit of a connection to the Year of Interfaith Understanding, when we planned for this year's Grand Dialogue, we wanted to make sure it had an interfaith focus. And so we decided that we had never had someone speak about science and religion from a Jewish perspective. And the work of Dr. Gerald Schroeder is well known for the work that he has done and the 4 books that he has published on this theme. And so we contacted him, and he has joined us coming from Jerusalem, where he has lived for the last 30 years or so, and we're very pleased to have him here with us. Dr. Schroeder has a Ph.D. from MIT in applied nuclear physics and in earth and planetary sciences. He taught at MIT for a period and then moved to Jerusalem, where he was professor at the Weizmann Institute and at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And is now teaches at Aish, HaTorah, the College of Jewish Studies in Jerusalem. Also, Dr. Schroeder just last month received the Trotter Prize that is given at Texas A&M, an annual prize that's given to people who have done significant work in science and religion, and it's awarded by the science department at Texas A&M, so we're very pleased that he has received this award. He's the author of 4 books, and all 4 books are available at our book table. And fortunately, because we have the author here with us today, we were able to get the author discount. So those books have been greatly reduced. Each of the books are available to you for $10. The first book that he published in this field was Genesis and the Big Bang, the discovery of harmony between modern science and the Bible. Then he published the book The Science of God, the convergence of science and biblical wisdom. His next book was The Hidden Face of God. Science reveals the ultimate truth, and he deals with the mind-body, mind-brain issue there, and a very interesting discussion in that book. And his latest book is God According to God. A scientist discovers we've been wrong about God all along. He describes this book as using his physics mind to the data of the Hebrew Scripture. And as he looks at that data, he says that some of our concepts that we thought we knew about God don't really fit what Scripture says. And so it's a very interesting book. Our faculty science and religion discussion group has read both of these books and have been enchanted by his approach. So at this point, I'm pleased to introduce to you and ask you to welcome Dr. Gerald Schroeder, who will speak to us on God in the Hebrew Bible. Science in the modern world can both be true.
Some of the hooks out there. Okay. So, thank you, Professor Kinchi, for that nice introduction. But thank you more for letting me come here and bring you greetings from my hometown, Jerusalem. Thanks to the entire Grand Dialogue Committee for letting me come here. Thank you. So the approach that I would take then is to try to understand whether we can find conflict rather than whether we can find confluence rather than conflict between the biblical understanding of how the world is put together, and the scientific understanding how it's been described. My field in applied nuclear physics had me present at a long series of nuclear detonations, atomic bombs. And at one of them, in those days, I wasn't part of this dialogue, the science Bible dialogue. It wasn't of interest to me. And then suddenly, in one of those events, the entire face of a mountain disappeared in a flash. It kind of impressed me. What is all this solidity about? Where did it go? And that kind of jump-started me on this approach, this search to see whether or not there was something behind all of the power that existed. I think the difference between the Bible, I would say Torah, I'm talking about the 5 books of Moses, but in general, say Bible, and primarily I'm relating to the Hebrew Bible. The difference between the Bible and science is not whether or not there was a creation. Both agree, both sources of wisdom, the wisdom of science and the wisdom of the Bible, both agree by the fact that there was a creation. The question that arises primarily is how long ago did it happen, and how did it happen, and how did it happen in the first place. There's no possibility that we could possibly claim that every statement in the Bible has a scientific explanation. There may be explanations that are scientifically valid, but there's no claim that you could find them all. There are limits to what science can know. There are limits to what humans can know. Our imagination is locked within a box of time, space, and matter. No one thinks out of that box. If you want an example of it, just try to think right now of an edge which has an inside but no outside. Can such a thing exist? Not in our universe, because we can only think in terms of our universe. Okay, we can't abstract things like time and space. It's just something as simple as an edge. Why shouldn't I? Or think of a universe in which there's no time. Well, that may make us look better when we look in the mirror in the morning, but we can't. There are things that we can't. So there are limits to what we can understand. And if the creator of the universe operates outside of those limits, then we can never access that. We may have examples, but we have to realize that there are limits to imagination. There are limits to scientific inquiry. But many of the things that do occur and are mentioned in the Bible, in fact, do have resonate with the scientific understanding. Part of the difficulty in this search, let us say, is that the Torah devotes a total of 27 sentences from the creation of the universe to the creation of the first human being. Not the first Homo sapiens sapien, the first Homo sapiens sapien with the soul of a human, the neshama. The Hebrew is the neshama, the soul of a human. Homo sapiens sapiens before this Adam were very much similar to us according to biblical tradition. They just didn't have the soul of a human. So, but why didn't God give us the whole story? Why are we limited just to these 27 sentences? I mean, the difference in how the Bible relates, let's say, to the construction of the tabernacle. There are like 4 or 5 chapters. We barely get 4. For the development of animal life, we get 6 sentences. From the first mention of animals to finally Adam. 6 biblical sentences. So don't expect that every detail comes popping out. But sometimes, especially in the classes I give in Jerusalem, you're all welcome. I give the classes in English. You're certainly welcome to come. It's the old city. It's a phenomenal place. You see you turn your head from here to here, and you see 3 religions, all trying to struggle for the same piece of land, which has no water, no oil, no coal, not very good wind power either. And for 3,000 years, we've all been arguing who owns this place. It makes you really believe that maybe there is something spiritual about the world. But let's say the Torah had in fact decided to give us the information. Don't limit it to 27 sentences. Give us the whole story. Now remember, we're talking to just freed slaves. For centuries, they've been beaten on and held in subjection. And now we're going to give this, God has decided to tell us the story. So a very dear friend of mine who passed away about died a year ago, Arnie Novak of Providence, when he was introducing one of the talks I was giving, several talks there in Providence, he said, this is more or less what the Bible would have had to say. It's going to give us the whole story. Don't worry, we're just going to get through the first day. We're not going to take a few billion years to get to the whole story. We'll finish it within the time I have allotted. God created the heavens and the earth. It's fine, we're going right along with the text. God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was astonishingly empty, darkness is on the surface of the deep, and the divine presence hovered over the surface of the waters. And God said, let there be light. No problem here. And there was a high-energy plasma that burst forth from a quantum fluctuation. Absolutely nothing. But as we all know, quantum physics allows creation from nothing. And God saw that light was good. But the problem is the light was trapped within the darkness of a plasma field. And everyone knows that in the plasma field, you can't have coherent information travel out. So light was trapped. So God had to separate the light from the darkness, because as the plasma cooled, light began to escape from this high-energy bundle. As the plasma cooled further, matter and antimatter are able to condense out of the high energy mix. We all know the equation equals mc squared. The difficulty, when energy condenses to matter, it always produces matter and antimatter. Well, that's not too good for the matter or the antimatter, because when the matter touches the antimatter and the matter annihilate, they go back to energy. So you're back to square one. We're back to the beginning again. But luckily, by some amazing reality, God tweaked the system apparently, and a bit more matter, maybe 1 part in a million, over the antimatter survived. And that's what makes us, and this, and everything we see around. Wow, isn't that lucky for us? And so therefore we have to thank God. Says at this point you have to thank God for that. So as these matters interact, they united, some formed, some didn't form, and eventually with the pressure cookers of the stars as they formed, due to coalescence by mutually forming gravity, the 92 elements formed. And called the light day, and called the darkness night. But that wasn't enough. There was evening and there was morning, one cosmic day. But now we've got a problem. There's no sun or moon yet. So the cosmic day was determined by counting the oscillations, the background radiation. Of course, that's what you do with it. The quantum event. And Moses transmitted this to the people. The people said, what are you talking about? You know? The point of the above, thank you, Arnie Nova. The point of the above story is that God couldn't have explained the creation to the Jewish people of the Exodus, at the time of the Exodus, of the giving of the Torah in Sinai. Because there would not have been the vocabulary or even the capacity to understand it. How much of us in the room understand a quantum fluctuation today? Possibly, I hope one of us does at least. On the other hand, God could have simply said that God created the heavens and the earth and all of it in 6 days. You could have said that in just one sentence. But he chose neither. Rather, God revealed the creation in a hidden manner, in subtlety within the text, why one word is spelt a certain way, why one word is chosen over another way, and left it as a challenge for future generations to reveal the puzzle. We literally are fortunate with the first generation that has the vocabulary and the information to demonstrate that many of the major conflicts that appear in the Torah, in the Bible, especially Genesis chapter 1, are not conflicts, because we now can see the information within. There's a wonderful quote by, I heard it from Steve Bolin, of Heisenberg in 1932. I think it was the Nobel Prize address. He said the following: when you take the first sip of the cup of the natural scientists, of the natural sciences, it makes you an atheist. But when you got to the bottom of the cup, you find God is waiting. God is in the details. God's in the details. So with that background and introduction, I won't go into all those details because that would take a few billion years. But we only have a few hours, but not even that. So what does it mean that we have to do? How can we read within the text to try to understand what's in those 27, or the whole chapter has 31 sentences, but by the time you get to Adam, it's only 27 sentences. How do we read within that, within the subtlety of the text? For that, we have to do exactly that. Read within the subtlety of the text. And it's easy to bend the Bible any way you want, unless you limit yourself, as I've limited myself in all my books and any talk I would give, on ancient biblical commentary. Ancient commentary that predates the digging up of dinosaur fossils, ancient commentary that Hubble's great-great-grandfather and grandmother weren't even a gleam in their eye, ancient commentary that goes back long before the discoveries of modern science. And see how the commentators saw within the text, not bending the text, saw within the text statements that reflect extraordinarily on the understanding of the physical world that we have today. So just quickly to go through, to mention the sources for those that are familiar with the terms or not, with the names or not. I'll give some background. The oldest, of course, would be the biblical text itself. Okay, it depends whether you take biblical criticism or not, but we know we're not something over 2,000 years old. Where the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Bible dates itself internally as 3,300 years old when you add up the generations. And then the major commentaries on the Torah, on the Bible. One of the oldest would be the Talmud. The Talmud was written down in the year 400. The earlier part of the Talmud, called the Mishnah, was written down in the year 200. So we're talking about, I think, 1,600 years ago, long before the local museum had the exhibits of campfires going back 70,000 years. And then the commentaries beyond that would be, for the individuals, one would be Rashi, the famous Rashi in the year 1090, that a human being could write as many, remember those days it was really manuscript, literally manuscript by the hand, that a human being could write as many words, even if it had been just gibberish in a single lifetime, is amazing. So Rashi is the major commentary on the meaning of the individual Hebrew words. And then after Rashi, the year 1090, about 100 years later, 1190, the philosopher, physician, theologian, Moses Maimonides, sometime called the Rambam with an M, Maimonides. And then a bit more than half a decade later, about 60 years later, half a century later, Nachmanides with an N, Ramban, Nachman. If I say the Ramban, it's because the acronym is the Ramban, but his name is Nachmanides. He is the major Kabbalistic commentary on the Torah. Kabbalah is not mysticism. Kabbalah is the spiritual physics of the world. You can get a mystical experience when you touch it, but it's not mysticism. It's very deep understanding of the spiritual physics. At MIT, I studied the material physics of the world. The spiritual physics is how God runs the world. And it's alluded to in a very, let's say, central proverb. A proverb on which much of the understanding of the deeper text below the surface is based. And that's Proverb 25, verse 11. The difficulty, I'll tell you, in teaching now in these days, I've given my classes, so you make a statement like this, and you want to quote it a certain way, and what do the kids do immediately? They pull out the laptop, they see what, and you can't bluff any longer. They got this stuff right in front of you these days. So Proverb 25, the Hebrew is verse 11, is quite difficult Hebrew, but the general translation is, a word well spoken is like apples of gold in a dish of silver. And we attribute the Proverbs to King Solomon about 2,500 years ago or so. The word well spoken is like apples of gold in a dish of silver. And Maimonides asks, what was King Solomon writing about? Why should a well-spoken word be like an apple of gold in a dish of silver? And he says like this, if you look at the dish from a distance, that's all you see, the beautiful silver dish. You can see its craftsmanship, you can even see the value of it. What you can't see is what's inside, the apples of gold. What's the silver dish? The literal text of the Bible. Do this, don't do that, act this way towards people, don't act that way. That's the silver dish, it's frontal teaching. What are the apples of gold? The deeper meanings. Why the Torah chooses a word over this, over that word, why it spells differently over that way. When it's talking about the forming of the animals, the Hebrew, the spelling of the word formed is different from when it talks about the forming of humans, yet the grammatical structure is identical. Why is it spelled differently? The apples of gold are the deeper meanings within the text. And Maimonides writes something amazing. He says, look what King Solomon wrote, apples of gold in a dish of silver, and not apples of silver in a dish of gold. And he writes, gold is more beautiful and more powerful and more valuable than silver. The silver dish is valuable, but the apples of gold are more valuable when you put them within the context of the silver dish. The apples of gold by themselves are meaningless. So the context of the two comes together, but it's golden apples in a dish of silver. So where can we see some of this amazing insight, the idea of going below the surface to try to get within a deeper meaning? It's not bending the Bible. We do this all the time. Science does it. That's the way of science. I mean, if you look out in the morning, watch the sun rise in the east and it sets in the west. If you behave yourself, you're around for the next morning, sun rises in the east, sets in the west. There goes the sun again. The silver dish reading of the universe is clearly the sun is going around the earth. But the golden apple, with some looking below the surface of our simple reading, is the earth is rotating on its axis, which makes it appear that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And that's on the cosmic scale. On the micro scale, I think it's even more dramatic. We look around, we find a solid table, stuff that hangs together called skin, a floor that's solid. You don't go right through it, and then you study nuclear physics. And you decide to understand the dimensions of an atom, with a T, not a D, atom, that, of what we're made. So to look at it carefully, you kind of like scale up, to see it like Sony might do, or whoever might make these things. So you scale it up, and we decide to make the center of the atom, called the nucleus, about the size of an orange or a grapefruit, something about that size, several inches in diameter like that. So now we've got the center of the atom, about like this, so we can look at it really carefully. So where do we put the electron cloud? An atom is made of a nucleus, the center, and then an electron cloud that goes around it. So we make the nucleus about this large, and again, about an orange or a grapefruit, something like that. So where's the electron cloud? Where's the closest cloud of the electrons? Of course, they have to be held, something holding, 4 miles away in each direction. You have this, the size of imagine if someone offered you all the wealth in the world, and they give you a volume 8 miles in diameter, 4 miles in each direction, it's 8 miles in diameter. They fill it with everything. You say inside of that, these ping pong balls, there's one red ping pong ball. You would spend your life and you couldn't find it. But every atom of which you're made is exactly like that. That relationship is 1 part in 1,000 billion. It's 15 zeros. The solidity of an atom is 1 part in 1,000 billion. 1 and 15 zeros after that. And yet, I didn't go through the floor. Well, that's rather surprising. There's nothing there in the first place. What's stopping me? And of course, we know it's forces that are happening. You think you're sitting on the chair, but you're not. You're actually levitating. You don't have to be a magician to levitate. Totally aside from this, but you all know the word abracadabra? Don't magicians still say abracadabra? It's Hebrew? Abracadabra. It's 2 Hebrew words. Abra, I will create, cadabra, as I speak. So it's interesting that it just is an aside. But so you're levitating. You're levitating because just try to push a magnet, the 2 positive poles together. They always slip aside. Well, that's what you got between here and the chair. And so you've got this little bit of a space in there, not even air. I mean, it's micro on the micro. But it's a reality. And it's totally different. That's the golden apple in the silver dish. The world seems very simple, but there are phenomena in the world that are amazingly, subtly different from how the world is put together. So what about the biblical text? Let's just take one thing from the biblical text that we have here, and we'll get into some questions. There's a text passed around. I prefer if you don't throw it on the floor because it is part of the Bible. To try to understand how we can find some subtleties within the biblical text that might let us then understand some of the aspects that go beyond the simple meaning. And that would be in this diagram that will be on the board in a moment. I hope that the diagram will be on the board in a moment. If I'm standing in the way of that. This diagram is directly from NASA. I would say anyone who is truly interested in their history, I say it seriously, anyone's truly interested in their history in the universe, everything on this board is straight from NASA, and it hasn't changed a word in almost 8 years. I downloaded it first time about 5 or 6 years ago. My students in class, every time I talk about this, like last week, and now they find it. You go to the website NASA, National, you don't have to spell it out, just NASA. And when you get there, type in WMAP, the initials for that satellite, and you get your history of the universe. I'm not going to go into the diagram at the moment in depth, but just one factor that there's a creation, and eventually out of the creation comes such order as people. This is the timeline. The universe expands in all directions, but this is expansion over time. The lines of billions of years. And finally, from a burst of energy, we get something so clever, a satellite. This is our timeline here. If we wanted to see the universe 5 billion years ago, count back 5 lines, expand this in 3 directions, and you'll find the universe then. This is us here. So what the diagram has said is out of a burst of energy, we get people or things that can be so clever, we call them people, that can actually make a satellite that can map the history of the universe and get 2 people the Nobel Prize. How could that possibly be? I mean, it doesn't make sense that, in fact, such order could arise out of chaos. But yes, it does make sense if we understand the subtlety within the text. If you look at the texts that were passed around, start at the beginning, which has the word wisdom at the top. At the end of each day, the same sentence appears. You see in verse number 5, this is Genesis chapter 1, by the way. This is the opening of the Bible. Genesis chapter 1 and a part of Genesis chapter 2. At the end of the first day, there's evening and morning, one day. Interesting. End of the second day, verse number 8, evening and morning, a second day. Verse 13, evening and morning, a third day. Now I request then, please, if you'll skim through, starting verse 14, the major events of the fourth day. Any suggestions what happens on the fourth day, the major events of the fourth day? Any thoughts? How about two great lights? Right? One to rule the day and one to rule the night. See that? Somewhere around verse 16 or so. Two great lights. The greater by the day, the lesser by night. Well, what could they be talking about? Any suggestions? What were they talking about? Yeah. You got a problem with the first 3 days? How do you have evening and morning for the first 3 days? Evening relates to sunset. Morning relates to sunrise. There's a bit of a conflict here. I mean, couldn't God have gotten it right? Really, it's embarrassing. Of course, that would be the silver dish reading of the text. And you don't need the golden apple to get home from work on time in the evening. But it's rather interesting. For thousands of years, how long is the English translation? Since 1611, and even before the Septuagint. But since 1611, we've had the English from King James and then further translations. And it does say there is evening and morning in modern Hebrew. But the word evening, as Nachmanides points out, can't be the only meaning for the word. This is totally not Schroeder, it's Nachmanides. Make it very clear. Nachmanides points out almost 1,000 years ago that how can you have evening and morning when there's no sun? So there must be a golden apple on the silver dish. And that explains what happens on that board right there. The golden apple is like this. The Hebrew word for evening is transliterated Erev, Ayin Resh Beit, Erev, there's 3 Hebrew letters. Erev means in the silver dish reading, as opposed to the golden apple, the simple verse, is evening. But Nachmanides points out we have to look for the golden apple because there's no sun. So he says, what happens in evening to vision? It becomes blurry, chaotic. Because the root meaning of Erev, evening, is not evening. The root meaning of Erev is chaos, mixture. That's why evening means evening. There's a tradition in Judaism on the Sabbath of not carrying things across boundaries. So you can put a wall around a city or a string, something symbolic around a city. It's called an eruv. The eruv, from the word eruv, mixes all the domains. So all the domains become one because it's mixture. So erev, the Hebrew word translated as evening, has the basis of irbuv, of mixture, chaos. That's its root meaning. On the other hand, boker, the Hebrew word for morning is beit kufresh, it's 3 Hebrew letters, and it means morning. But morning relates to sunrise, when vision becomes clear. At sunset, vision becomes blurry, chaotic, hence erev. In morning, vision becomes clear, boker, livaker, to be able to understand, to recognize. So Nachmanides points out, which is what the notes are on the text here, that's passed around, that the golden apple in the silver dish is that erev gave way to boker. That evening, that chaos gave way to order. And the Torah is astounded by that, and it wants us to be astounded by it also. Because it is an unequivocal statement that order never arises spontaneously from a disorderly system and remains orderly. The sentence is a continuing sentence. The order never, not rarely, never arises spontaneously from a disorderly system and remains orderly unless something in nature has built that order in, recognizes the order, and maintains it. I live in Jerusalem, just over the hill and down. We go to the lowest exposed point on the face of the earth, the Dead Sea, it's called the Salt Sea in Genesis. In the book of Genesis, it's mentioned already in Genesis. The Salt Sea, the Dead Sea. You take a dish of the Dead Sea water, and you put it out in the sun, and it evaporates, and gradually salt crystals form. Now, which atom of sodium will match up with bromine or chlorine, whatever? Which of those atoms or ions match to form the crystal may be random. But the shape of the crystal has been built into this universe since the creation. The potential for salt crystals has been present in the universe since the creation. It is part of the chemistry of the world, which is part of the laws of nature. Which atom may form, that's a different story, but the shape is present. There's an example of order rising spontaneously from a disorderly system, the massive things just moving around in liquid, and remaining orderly, because nature recognized it, or it's part of the laws of nature. It's built into the system. And one begins to wonder, time and again, you hear even atheist scientists say, it looks like the universe knew we were coming. That it just seems that things are built so perfectly. The Scientific American a few years ago, in a cover issue, Infinite Earths in Parallel Universes Really Exist. That's the title. But then you open the text and read it, and they don't really know, maybe yes, maybe no. And what's the information that we have of Infinite Earths in Parallel Universes Really Existing, which is on the cover, so you bought the journal, and it's the most widely read science journal in the world, but not peer-reviewed, and has a spin that is highly materialistic, naturalistic. The information, as they say point blank, is our universe is so perfect for complex life, that it infers, that's the word, now it infers the existence of other universes, because our laws of nature, they claim, were established by random processes at the birth of the universe. Therefore, there must be other universes that don't have these laws, because randomness couldn't produce this perfection. But you realize what they're saying, that if we, where Bernard Carr says it from the Imperial College in London, if you don't want God, you better have many universes. It's called the multiverse. If you don't want God, you better have a multiverse. Because the universe, and that's a statement from Scientific American, which is 100% in its approach, let's say naturalistic, put it that way. So the Torah is so amazed by this flow from energy to life that 6 times over it hammers it home. And then he earned his Nobel Prize. He earned his Nobel Prize for understanding the physics at the quantum level of how I can look over here, Doug, and then as quickly as I move my head, don't be insulted, but I don't see you any longer, I see over there. As fast as I move my head, Wald realized that there's something very strange going on in this world, that the chemistry is taking place in microseconds, in picoseconds, and it's chemistry that's going on there. And he published in the International Journal of Quantum Chemistry, peer-reviewed, and it's always at the peer level. It's exactly what Heisenberg says, at the bottom of the cup. You know, the first sip of the natural sciences makes you an atheist, but at the bottom of the cup, God is waiting. And Wald wrote like this, again, in the peer-reviewed International Journal of Quantum Chemistry. It has occurred to me lately, I must confess with shock at first my scientific sensibilities. This is his speaking, no wonder he's shocked. It has occurred to me lately, I must confess with some shock at first to my scientific sensibilities, that both the questions of the origin of life from non-living matter and the origin of consciousness in these humans, or life in general that has emerged from this non-living matter, might be brought into some degree of congruence. This is with the assumption that mind, M-I-N-D, mind, rather than emerging as a late outgrowth in the evolution of life, has always existed as the matrix, the source, and the condition of physical reality. The stuff of which physical reality is composed is mind stuff. It is mind that has composed the physical universe, that breeds life, and so eventually evolves creatures that know and create the sciences and the arts. In them, the universe begins to know itself. Mind is the essence of existence according to the text and according to the Bible. The Bible calls it wisdom. Wald calls it mind. Heisenberg calls it an idea. James calls it a thought. But they're not two sides of the same coin. They're the same side of the same coin, just using different letters. The essence of existence is totally not materialist. Schrodinger says it perfectly. Erwin Schrodinger, another Nobel laureate. We do not belong in this picture. The reason we think we are in the picture is that our bodies are in the picture. And our only way of communicating with our bodies is through the brain. So who's the we? The we would be mind, I would say. That's what I would say. That this is. I mean, the debate has been going on since Descartes, but I think it's becoming more and more established. If in fact it is true what the Torah has been saying for 3,000 years, that wisdom is the source of creation, that mind is the essence of existence, that would and that we are not in the picture. I mean, you can quote out-of-body experiences, but they're usually anecdotal, so I don't get into them where people see themselves I've talked with several people who have had those, who have died and come back, but it's not too good idea to quote them and rely on them primarily because they could be considered anecdotal. But the fact is that physics has shown us that the universe is the expression of energy, of a wisdom, of an emanation from God. Is pretty amazing. And what it would mean then, I would understand, is that I put it this way, that death, what we call death, would mark the end of the body's participation in life. That's the way I would see it. That's the best way I can say it. That death marks the end of the body's participation in life. It doesn't mark the end of life. It marks the end of this chapter of life. And the life would continue because, indeed, we see here that the indications are that something absolutely not physical created the physical from absolute nothing, which would mean something totally ethereal. And usually, when you see things becoming more complex, let's say they're fractals of the underlying basis. So it becomes more complex, but it's usually built from that information, and that information is present at the beginning. So where would mind be? To just leap to another type of a topic, mind would be like the radio waves in a radio, right? Smash the radio waves are still out there, not affected by smashing the radio. Or a cell phone might be better. In this room, there are probably at least 30,000 cell phone measurements going on. Whether you turned your phone, if everyone had their phone off, none might be ringing because your cell phone is tuned into one particular wave frequency or carrier frequency. And so everyone else you don't pick up, and that could be mind also. That your brain is the antenna that picks up your mind. Speculation, but it is possible. So should I stop here? Keep going a little bit, just a tiny bit, just a very tiny bit more. Comes out to be whether or not. Well, two things are. The question remains whether this mind that creates the universe, is it possible that we can pray to it? Obviously, the Torah claims that we can, and then the other aspect was that we all agree that science and Torah agree that there was a creation, and the question then would be how long ago it happened. We're not going to get into that other than the fact that bending the Bible by saying that the days of Genesis, there are 6 24-hour days, or 6 days, bending the Bible that the days weren't days is nowhere found in ancient biblical commentary. But the ancient biblical commentary, and you'll see it yourself also, realizes that there are 2 perspectives of time. Anyone in astronomy will be getting about into the answer already. 2 perspectives of time. From the creation up to Adam, the Bible sees time from what I call a cosmic time. How does it see that? Because the description of time, I'll use the simplistic translation, there's evening and morning, day 1, more things happening, evening and morning, a second day, more things happening. And there's always this very strange concept of time, evening and morning, no relationship to human reality. Once, in verse 27, the Adam is created, and that creation relates to Adam's soul. The body, the Torah, therefore, changes its perspective of time, and every passage of time following Adam is related to human time on earth. The calendar stops at the end of chapter 1 and the first sentence of chapter 2 where it talks about the Sabbath, and then the calendar is not mentioned again until the 5th chapter, in which it says Adam and Eve live 130 years, have a child named Seth. Seth lives 105 years, there's a kid named Enosh. From Adam forward, every passage of time is earth-based. So there are 2 perspectives of time, one looking back and one looking forward. The creation, and that spins out of the fact that Genesis chapter 1, day 1, ends with there was evening and morning one day. It doesn't say there was a first day. The Torah sees time for the 6 days of Genesis from the only perspective when there hadn't been a second day, as Nachmanides points out, from the beginning. That's why the Torah says day 1, as opposed to a first day. It says there's evening or a second day, third day. So there are 2 perspectives of time, and I'll leave it at that. If you're interested in that, on my website, geraldschroeder.com, there's there are about 5 articles, and you just click on the article section, and you go to one is called The Age of the Universe, and it leads you by the hand. And in other words, if we hadn't gotten into the idea of mind and brain and spirituality in the world, so we could have talked about that, and maybe in the question and answer section we get more into that. But in that section on GeraldSchroeder, oneword.com, you can find that article which leads you by the hand. It's also in the Science of God. the whole discussion of the book, The Science of God, that some of you have. And if it wasn't the Sabbath, I'd sign the books for you. But the problem is, if I sign them, first of all, you can't return them, and the second is I don't write on the Sabbath, so the biblical Sabbath. So I think that's we'll leave it at that.
Take the center seat.
Okay, I think I took your sheet.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schroeder. A whirlwind of ideas have consumed us here, and it's very exciting, and I think any one of them could lead to lots and lots of discussion. At this point, we're going to have a couple of responders to the talk, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. So I would ask Shel Copperell and Fred Stella to join us. Dr. Sheldon Copperell is a professor at Grand Valley in biomedical science and in also liberal studies. And Fred Stella is the president of the Interfaith Dialogue Association. And so we're bringing an interfaith panel to respond to Dr. Schroeder and to introduce our question and answer periods. I'll ask Shel Copperell to begin.
Well, thank you very much, Gerald, for a most interesting talk. As someone who has been interested in trying to find some of these mysteries in the Hebrew Bible that Dr. Schroeder has been mentioning, I find it fascinating, your story about how you just seeing a mountain disappear led you to believe that there must be something beyond just matter itself. I guess my reaction to that is that you must have had some interest all along in going beyond the literal text of the Bible. I suppose, could you just explain a little bit about how other people reacted to your newfound interest?
You mean my colleagues?
Yes.
Well, one of them asked me, why do you keep it a secret? when he first discovered he was visiting his daughter in Scandinavia, and I was living in Israel, and he, in the bookstore, he saw Genesis of the Big Bang, and he came back and said, you kept this a secret? It's a mixture. Many persons have no interest in it whatsoever, and some will say, well, don't bother me with what you're saying because I see you're bending the Bible. But I say, look, I'm only using ancient commentary. I'm not using modern commentary. So it is an absolute mix from complete disinterest to arguments for or against or, thank you. I'm happy to say there have been a lot of thank yous. Maybe the naysayers don't like to, they're more reticent to argue with me, but there are arguments.
No, I think just from my own perspective, it's fascinating to hear how some of these interpretations can develop. For example, you were talking about the notion of Erev and Voker, evening and morning, and how evening can also mean just a mixture. And one place where you find that very neatly discussed is in the 10 plagues of Egypt, where the fourth plague is actually referred to as Arov, and a mixture, and a mixture of what? So you look at the different English translations, and some of them refer to a swarm of flies, others refer to a mixture of wild animals, and even the commentators. Again, you get this interesting situation where Rashi says one thing and Nachmanides says the other. And so that made me think. I hadn't realized that until I actually heard you mention that last night about the idea of evening and mixture. And so I think that one of the most wonderful things about reading the Hebrew Bible, and all Jews from the most Orthodox to the most Reform will agree that the words of Torah can be turned around and interpreted in many different ways, and even though we may not all agree on each exact interpretation, the idea is, as the Talmud tells us, this and that are both the words of the living God.
Yeah.
And so it's our duty as Jews working with the sacred texts to look at every facet and every aspect of them. The Talmud goes on and says, turn each around like it's a gemstone with shiny faces, each reflecting the light, to see what you can make of God's word. And so the idea that wisdom is the ultimate source of everything in the universe, while as an historian of science, I thought I had problems with Thales talking about water being the element of the universe. Certainly the notion of wisdom being the element of the universe is far more complex, but having read your book, God According to God, I can see where you're coming from. It's just really a remarkable way of looking at the whole source of the universe. And I hope that some of the people in the audience today will be asking questions, raising some more issues about that. That was the aspect of your work that I found most fascinating.
Thanks. I found it fascinating also.
Red, do you want to make some comments?
Well, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. Doug neglected to offer my science credentials, of which I have a few. I do want to mention that in 7th grade, I did get an honorable mention for a model of the solar system that I created. Okay, my mom did a lot of it. And also in my work towards my bachelor's, I did take both Biology 101 and Physics 101. I flunked neither, thank you very much. So I just wanted to know, we're peers, or peeps, whatever. I'm coming from the Hindu tradition here, and as I also had the wonderful opportunity to interview Dr. Schroeder for our Interfaith Dialogue radio program, Common Threads, a few weeks back, and in reading the summaries of the book club that has been studying his books, and through the interview and our conversations last night, it just makes me wish so much that you have an opportunity sometime to have a real dialogue with some of the great Hindu physicists that are practicing today. You will find just an amazing synchronicity, an amazing comparison, and I'll share just a couple of what I know. Again, not being an expert in this field. I've been encouraging Jewish-Hindu dialogue for a long time because while the silver bowls may be different, they share a lot of golden apples. In the late 19th century, a mystic by the name of Swami Sri Yukteswar wrote a book called The Holy Science, in which he takes verses of both the Christian Testament and the Hebrew Bible, and he compares them to the Vedas, which are our ancient scriptures, and comes up with an understanding, attempts to make a scientific understanding of some of these verses. Then his disciple, Paramhansa Yogananda, comes to this country, and he takes the work a little further. Again, maintaining a Hindu foundation philosophically and theologically, but looking at the Hebrew Bible, for instance, in the creation story, and trying to see how can I accept this without changing my worldview. He has no knowledge of Hebrew. He's reading the King James Version, the King James translation. And I find it fascinating that much of what he says resonates, not entirely, but at least he tries to dig deeper, again, intuitively, thinking that, no, this word can't possibly mean this, as day and night. Mm-hmm. This can't possibly mean this is day, this is night when there's no sun. Now, he claims that the creation of light was the infusion of electrons. He says that God moving upon the waters was the creation of elements. But most interesting, when you say that the ultimate source is wisdom. In the Hindu tradition, we understand that the divine exists in this transcendent realm, and that from the transcendent realm to the physical realm, there are two chambers, if you will. That you go from the divine realm to the realm of thought, where everything exists but only in thought. And then it moves, if you want to say devolves, into the realm of energy. And then from energy, the realm of energy, into the world of the physical. And this is how Paramhansa Yogananda understood the creation story. I won't go into all of the details, but I feel quite a resonance. There are Hindu physicists today, Amit Goswami and Dr. Mohan Roy, and I would love to see people from Dr. Schroeder's school and people who come from the school of the Vedic sciences. And by the way, according to the Vedic scriptures, the estimated age of the universe is anywhere between almost 9 billion years and 13 billion years. And the understanding of the evolution of humanity is very close to your understanding of development. Very, very close to that, as opposed to natural selection. So I will leave it there, but thank you very much for
It's
being
interesting.
here.
I mean, it sounds really that there's a great agreement, a great overlap.
And just one additional thought, that the notion of wisdom, going back even to another very important Jewish concept of teaching our children, Proverbs does say, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Yireh Adonai Reshit Da'at. And I don't remember much about my very earliest Hebrew education, but I do remember the name of our first learning textbook from the Orthodox tradition was Reshit Da'at. And I don't know whether they still use that.
It might be
word.
Reshit Chachma even. Sure, it wasn't Reshit Chachma. Yeah.
Yes, and so the whole notion of this idea of the beginning and wisdom and God and a reverence or acknowledgement of God all being tied up with something very elemental, I think is even passed on through our children in terms of the way we learn today. Very, very important tradition.
Thank you very much. We've been privileged to receive a deep Hebrew Jewish understanding and some hints of a Hindu understanding. For an audience that I'm guessing is predominantly Christian, this must raise lots of questions. So we're going to open up the question and answer period. We'll turn on the mics and ask you to line up here, and we'll go back and forth to the mics. And I think this one is on first, so we'll start with this one, and then we'll move over there. We need to turn on the mic there as well. It's right on top, Raj.
It's on.
Not working?
Is it on?
It's tapping. When you tap, we heard it. When you tapped, you heard it. Yeah, speaking to
Okay,
it.
thank you very much.
Okay.
My name is John Cooper. I teach at Calvin Seminary, so I'm a Christian, and I would just briefly like to make a Christian contribution to the dialogue to connect directly with what Professor Schroeder said. I was just absolutely fascinated, and would just like to say that in Christianity, we not only say that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, so building on the Hebrew religion, but we also say that Jesus is the Logos through whom all things were created. Now, that's not a Greek concept, that's Davar Yaveh from the Hebrew Bible. And that Jesus Christ is the wisdom, the firstborn of God, through whom all things were created. And so the picture that you laid out this morning is very much also available to and affirmed in the Christian tradition.
It's John, right? Is it John 1:1? Logos, the Logos. Yeah. It's the same wisdom, Logos, Chachma, but then John had read the Hebrew Bible.
You spoke of you spoke of wisdom and thought, so to speak, and then the realm of that going to energy, manifest, then energy, then matter. Take a minute or two and tell us the next marvelous step, life.
I mean, how matter evolves life? How life evolves from matter? I don't think anyone has an idea how rocks and water became alive 4 billion years ago, but that's the understanding from the fossil record, or 3.5 billion years ago. But that's what was on the earth, rocks. So I would think that would have to be, it sounds very much like God forcing this on the world, but we do have we have a creation of the world in the first place. So I would say that somehow this wisdom that becomes present manifests itself in mind. It's what Wald talks about, that mind is the matrix, and somehow that mind gives way to life. I mean, if we look at the DNA, everyone has this, every form of life, from a fungi up to a sequoia tree and us in the middle, have the same DNA. There's no evidence of any evolution, so it looks like this software of life, this genetic information, was invented at the very beginning, and that sounds like seems to me unlikely that that nature would have gotten the system so perfectly. We see with language, it's totally different. Language has evolved tremendously, from hieroglyphics to different language to different languages even today. So the biological system for storing information, the biologically derived system, namely language, has undergone huge evolution. It doesn't look like the genetic system for storing evolution has undergone any evolution, because it's the same across the board. And that would imply that, in me at least, that there was some kind of a input. And we never want to have God acting in the system, but or this metaphysical, but there it is. I mean, Scientific American says the metaphysical created the physical. So if you want to have the metaphysical, to say that we can't carry it further into the system, I think is not fair. So I would say, I don't think there is a naturalist. It sounds terrible to say that. You can't help it. I don't think there's a naturalist understanding for how life started. I think it would require some kind of a mind input, whether it's programmed from the beginning. Whether that's present in the beginning. I don't know. We can certainly know that on energy you can imprint huge amounts of information on electromagnetic radiation by the microsecond downstream. After the creation, most of the energy is confined to, or embedded in electromagnetic radiation, light beams, in other words. I mean, that's what carries radio signals, that's what carries television, that's what carries your phone. I mean, if humans can imprint on a wave, color and music and the whole story, I would presume the mind of the universe could imprint on energy DNA, whether, that information. I'm not saying that's what happened. It was a suggestion by my brother-in-law, Gil Guller, that it's certainly possible. Whether that happened, I don't know, but it is a possibility.
Okay, over here.
Dr. Schroeder, thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom with us. I just want to make a brief comment and then ask a question. Dr. Schroeder, the title of your talk was whether or not religion and science can work together.
Talk more into the microphone.
I don't think it's... Okay. Dr. Schroeder, your speech also was in regard to whether or not religion and science can work together. The great rift between religion and science is no secret and has resulted in a loss of subjectivity over science, and the ability to control scientific technology is gradually weakening. For example, in an article by Joe Achenbach entitled "Shaking Their Faith," the quake and resulting tsunami in Japan last year set off power outages and meltdowns at Fukushima nuclear plant that will take decades to recover from. According to the report, it humbled the scientific community. One of the reasons for man's loss of subjectivity over science and technology is that some scientists, in the process of scientific development, sometimes exclude the questions of humanity and man's moral values referred to by all the great religions of the world. One solution: religion and science all over the world must unite around an absolute standard of moral values based on a universal understanding that there is one creator and we are his children, making us one family under God.
Could you get your question, please? We have a lot of people waiting here.
Sir, you've already demonstrated that science and religion can work together, and that science can actually help us understand God more deeply. Do you see this as a growing trend in science and religion?
Well, I see it's a trend that science has brought the metaphysical, the mystical, if you want, into the science lab. And the way, if you present information to kids, which includes just the discoveries, that diagram there and the description, kids are smart. You don't have to say the word God in class. You know, if the government doesn't want you to have mixed science and religion, you don't have to. Just bring science into the class, not prejudicial, but science into the classroom. Things like the idea of the creation of the universe from absolute nothing. What does that imply? In other words, you don't have to say the word God or theology or whatever. So I would say that the change will come when the textbooks of Texas and California, which are the ones that shape the world, will have the courage to put this information in its most fundamental way, because what Heisenberg said is actually correct. At the bottom of the cup, in the details, God's in the details. And so that would say, all we have to do is teach the information at its most fundamental level before the kids get prejudiced in one way or another.
Thank you very much.
Mark?
Thank you very much. Would you just explain again why the quantum fluctuations by themselves aren't sufficient?
Oh, they could be
Isn't
sufficient.
that the atheist position, that the quantum fluctuations by themselves are sufficient to explain everything?
Yes.
Why is that
not
not the
explain
case?
everything? They explain, this is a secular diagram, right? It's right off the web. Every word on there is on the way you download it yourself. You have your whole history. So it's a totally secular statement of the creation, and it doesn't say God. In other words, it allows the physics of the world to produce. The difficulty is, in studies of evolution, you never talk about how light beams became people. You always talk about fish became frogs. It's not even interesting. How a fin becomes a foot. Big deal. Light beams became fishes and foot, and you bring that into the class, what the woman was just asking, bring that into the classroom, the kids will really begin to ask questions. I can't explain why, but it is a simple fact that the text doesn't claim what happens from that point forward. Okay, it just says this is the creation, and then we have, stars making the elements and energy becoming matter. So this diagram doesn't say how that could happen. It just says it happened, and then you can draw your conclusions as to how it happened.
But the atheist will just say you don't need anything beyond the quantum fluctuation. The quantum fluctuation itself will give rise to the whole universe.
Oh, it will, but will it give rise to sentient life? Will it be, although you can make these statements of things that can happen by chance, I had this experience with a philosopher atheist, Anthony Flew. I don't know if you know the name of it, but Flew was, to position him in atheist philosophy, he died about 3 or 4 years ago. In the 1950s, he wrote an article, Falsifying God, okay? He's from England, F-L-E-W. That article was, according to the press and his obituary, that article that he wrote, Falsifying God, was the most widely quoted article in any field of philosophy, for 50 years. And we all publish, you go home and your wife pats you in the back, wasn't that lovely, you got in science, and you're really good boy. But the articles mean nothing if they're not quoted. That's the only way we can judge whether a publication is significant or not. His was the most widely quoted paper in any field of philosophy for 50 years, proving there's no God. And then he read a few of the books that are out there on the table, and Roy Varghese, a very dear friend from Dallas, got Anthony Flew and me, and he brought me from Israel, from England, and we got together, we spent 2.5 days. And Flew had already understood the mistake, and he changed it. He apologized. I don't know if you know the history, but in fact, he apologized in print and in the video media, television, for leading people astray for 50 years. He apologized. So how it happened is the problem. One of the things that convinced him was randomness doesn't produce order. And what he had been convinced was that the monkeys hammering away on typewriters could produce a Shakespeare sonnet. That's it's strange, but you always hear that, right? The monkey's hammering. Stephen Hawking quotes it even in his book. Do the calculation. You will never, not in this, it would take about, if you do the numbers, it would take about a universe 10 to the 600th times older or more massive to produce a Shakespeare sonnet. The numbers come out very easy. That's why I'm surprised that Hawking has it in his book, The Brief History of Time, because you do that calculation in the back of an envelope. So when he realized that he'd been fed a bunch of garbage, namely that the universe did have that we discovered that the universe did have a beginning, and that randomness doesn't produce Shakespeare sonnets, because it doesn't. You can make the calculations very straightforward to make. He realized that he'd been, hanging his atheism on a fictitious hook. The problem was when that hook fell, he was pilloried, as was I. The New York Times was a huge article. The guy must have had a fixation. He mentioned me 9 times. This is leading the poor guy astray. So he had some kind of fixation on this, the author. But when you look at the numbers, randomness just doesn't cut it. Regardless of the diagrams that Richard Dawkins makes, where it shows this, it can become like, that.
Okay, here.
Yeah. So Mark kind of took my question here, but sort of a follow-up on that. If we're using like an argument for the existence of God from a first cause, it does seem that a completely random event out of completely nothing would seem to undermine an argument from first cause. Now, do you believe that we can still make an argument along those lines, even given acceptance of this quantum fluctuation in that sense?
I have an article on my website. You don't need God to create a universe. You don't need God. What you need is the laws of physics or the laws of nature. But maybe that to create a universe like our universe, when you look at the data, you may need a mind or a guide for that first cause. The first cause people usually consider to be God, but if you drop God out of the equation, you take the laws of nature, you don't need God. But to make our universe, you may need a God. That's what Scientific American says. I mean, that's amazing. It's a totally secular journal. That if we're the only universe, you're stuck with God.
Charlie?
So I have a 2-part question, so I'm really sneaking it in. I apologize in advance. But first part of the question is it a consensus now in the scientific community that the Big Bang was a one-time singular event rather than a series of Big Bangs expanding and contracting? And if it's a consensus that it's a one-time singular event, prior to the Big Bang, how long was God hanging around and what was he doing?
Okay. So prior to the Big Bang, there was, it's interesting that, of course, there's an old adage I shouldn't throw the topic here, in Judaism, that what was God doing after he created man? He spent all his time trying to make matchmaking. That was really hard. He should have made matchmaking. But the data, you'll notice it's not a misprint on the board. The rate of, I'm sure you know, the rate of expansion is increasing, not decreasing. So that pretty much argues against the idea of the universe collapsing again, but the data do show that the rate of expansion is increasing, which are the big surprises, and most people in the audience realize today. So it doesn't look like it's the idea of the us thing, and the critical mass doesn't seem to be there. Realize what happens if the universe is expanded with a given amount of energy, where the gravity on this galaxy is pulling on this galaxy as they move apart. So what's going to happen? They'd slow down, and of course they'd slow it, and then come back down. But all the data argue against it. I mean, there's another example. The fact that we don't know what 94% of the universe is, because 94% of the universe isn't this, and it's not space. It's something else, totally. It doesn't mean that we won't find what it is, but for certain, it's not the ordinary matter that we know. But so the rate of expansion is increasing. So the likelihood of it collapsing on itself is slim, because it looks like, in fact, it is. In fact, if this phenomenon continues, then, and if it's still around in a few tens or 20 billion years, we will then think exactly what Einstein thought before Hubble did his work, that we're the only universe, that we're the only galaxy, because in several tens of billions of years, space will stretch so much that no other galaxies will be visible. and we'll think we're the only one. We live in a very special time. We've got the physics to make the measurement, and we can also see other galaxies. But that won't always be the case if we can last that long, which is questionable considering the politics at the moment.
So part two, what was God doing all that time before the Big Bang?
Matchmaking. Well, before the creation, there wasn't time. It's hard to understand. We're getting feedback here somehow. It's hard to understand what it means to be outside of time or not, but we have an example in this world, and thanks to Einstein's laws of relativity, the speed of light, time doesn't exist. Okay, so here's just a simple example. If we measure the time it takes for a light beam to travel from the sun to the earth, from our coordinates, it takes about 8 minutes and 10 seconds, 15 seconds, so 8 minutes and 15 seconds. But if you travel down that light beam, you measure 0 time. So there are two perspectives of time. So being in those 8 minutes and 15 seconds, when I give this in this session in class, I give it a little skit. I eat breakfast during that time, do all these kinds of things. If that light beam had watched me in the kitchen, it would see me choose between oatmeal and high cholesterol eggs. It would see me choose between butter and watch me throw the margarine in the garbage pail because the trans fats. It would see me do all those things in 0 time, which doesn't fit in our brain. So we have in our world an existence of a phenomena that exists outside of time. It's called light beams. So before the creation, God was outside of time, so the concept of time as we understand it doesn't exist. But luckily, inside of time, God can make shidduchim, which is the Hebrew word for matchmaking.
Real briefly, Charlie, I realize that the evidence certainly indicates that this might not be true, as the professor just said. But in the Hindu scriptures, in the Vedas, there is an oscillating universe, that creation happened and then didn't happen many times. It's called the night of Brahma, when there's no thing, and a day of Brahma. We are in a day of Brahma.
Thank you. My name is William Carr, and I'm proud to be here to listen to you, Professor. I was a student in 1992 under Professor Aaron Stolberg in the University of Jerusalem while I lived there, and I greatly appreciate what you have put together. Your idea of making something out of nothing intrigues me. Between you and Professor Stolberg, you're parallel in thought. He gave an hypothesis. He said if you took a very, very powerful microscope and you went into, i.e., a human being, a living being, and you go down to the atom, you would find the nucleus of the atom with the electrons spinning around it, and the nucleus would be like our sun, and the electrons would be like the earth, and et cetera, spinning around the sun. And then he says you would come out of that living being, and you'd see a telescope, a very powerful telescope, and you'd look off into space, and you'd find like the sun with the earth spinning around it, and on the earth you have living beings. My question was, and I didn't get an answer then, would there be living beings in the electrons within our own being body, and because Professor Stolberg said that creation is not stopped, it's continuing. So would you make a comment on those, please?
Well, according to whether there be other beings, according to the biblical text, as brought down by the commentator Rashi, the idea of cognizance exists in all matter. Physics said,
Maybe that's why I didn't get the answer the first time in 1992.
I'll go back. That's very strange. What's happening?
Turn off these other 2 lights right here, and you might be okay. Have one on there, and then shut these off while you're talking.
Try that, yeah. I did have a problem before.
It's strange. Maybe I'll just talk without this. I want to take this off. Can you turn this off? How does it turn off?
I don't know how to turn it off is the problem when our tech's not here anymore.
No, I'll just yell it loud.
Well, I think, let's see if this works. No.
Well, okay. So, according to the biblical text, and according to Rashi's understanding of the biblical text, I want to get into it before it's doing that again. Cognizance, not life, but cognizance exists at every level, including rocks and water. Rashi learns this from two statements in the to just show how it's learned out. In chapter 1, verse 11, you have in front of you, God says, create a bunch of kinds of life, and one of them is fruit trees that make fruit. The next verse says, the earth brought forth trees that make fruit. God wanted fruit trees that make fruit, but the earth didn't do that. God brought trees that make fruit. God wanted the tree to be a fruit, like the bark, like a cinnamon tree, and also the fruit. Now, it sounds strange, but if it weren't Rashi, you'd say it's patently ridiculous. Rashi points out what happens in chapter 3, verse 17. He says, isn't it strange? Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit. God chastises Adam, God chastises Eve, the snake, etc. It comes to Adam, and God says to Adam, because you ate of the fruit I told you not to eat, cursed is the ground. See the non sequitur? Adam ate of the fruit, the ground gets cursed. I make you hear the ground saying, what do you want from me already? You put in the garden. You make it beautiful. What do you think? You tell them what to eat it. The first thing people are going to eat it. So why'd you say in the first place? That's the ground speaking to God, as it were. So Rashi back there in verse 11 says the reason that the ground is cursed, the reason that the ground is cursed in chapter 3, verse 17, is because the ground went against God's word here in chapter 1, verse 11 and 12. God wanted fruit trees that make fruit. Earth didn't do it. Made trees that make fruit, but not fruit trees that make fruit. There was a tree wasn't the fruit also. So that's pretty amazing. But physics would say, what else is new? We've been talking about that for the last 80 years. That a level of cognizance exists at all levels. Rashi says, according to those verses, that cognizance is present, inherent in everything, which is exactly what Heisenberg says and what Schrodinger says and what Wald says in physics. Rashi just learned it out from those two sentences. So I don't know if there's people on the electrons, but I would guess that there's cognizance within the physical world at every level.
So are you saying that creation is continuing all the time and there's possibilities of life in different places, different forms, i.e. within a community?
We'll have to lean up and use that one.
Okay. So I would be saying that maybe life. No. See, it's not this. It's something else. I don't have a mic on any longer. I'd like this off.
I thought I unplugged it.
It is off.
Let me take it. Just let me take it. Get it out of here.
No, it's off. It's off. It's off. It's off. You can hear it. It's not making a noise. So some other mics are picking it up. Maybe this one over here.
Bring the table mic closer to you.
Why should I do that? Won't that make it worse? Oh, that's a different perturbation. Thank you for thinking out of the box. Let's get it back. Let's get it back in the box.
Any other theories?
Table mic, right?
Yeah.
Try moving the water away. Dr. Schroeder's voice is bouncing off the mic. Off the water.
No. Okay. Well, let's see. So the fact that there might be life elsewhere in the universe doesn't relate to whether the Bible is true relative to our part of the universe. The Genesis chapter 1 is almost like a zoom lens. It starts out, the first sentences or so, the whole universe. By day 3, it's only the earth. By day 6, it's only people. It didn't forget about the universe, it's just not interested in it. We see that time and again through the text. It zooms in on a topic. So the name won't mean much to maybe only more than just one or two persons here. But many years ago, before I moved to Israel, I heard a lecture who was a person by the name of Joseph Soloveitchik. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik was the top of the mountain as far as, European Jew, because Jews have African Jews and European. He was the major sort. He was the major statement. And someone asked him, is it possible there's life elsewhere in the universe? And his reply was like that. And I say, thank God I was standing next to him. Today I wouldn't stand next to such an intelligent person like that, but I stood then, and his answer was, as far as I understand the Bible, there's no problem with life existing elsewhere in the universe. And I say, if it's okay by Rabbi Soloveitchik, it's okay by me. But if we find life elsewhere in the universe, it's absolute proof of God. Absolute proof. Not just a casual, absolute proof. You can't get life twice. not by chance.
If it's okay with you, and it was okay with Professor Stolberg, I guess it's okay with me.
Okay.
Thank you for increasing our awareness, by the way. I do believe that all things first exist in spiritual reality first, and the spirit realm is parenthetic to this natural realm. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. That's the answer to his question. Watch how God unfolds science through wisdom. In the beginning, God created science, a pattern of creation. That word create means reveal. And I love what you said in the beginning. He did not create the world, he created wisdom. And in the Sophia wisdom of God, that word Sophia there in the Greek is divine, metaphysical, supernatural wisdom of God. God said and God saw. He spoke and he created as he spoke the heavens and the earth into existence. Proverbs 8 says he first created wisdom. And that's the principal thing. John 1 says in the beginning was the Word. That Word was wisdom. In the beginning was God. And he said El Shaddai is his name, meaning all-sufficient one. Meaning in him exists everything. God does not need a life force in him at all. We do. He does not need anything at all. That word source means father, or highest, most creative principle, or all-inclusive one, or he that filleth all in all. That means omnipresent, understanding, and righteousness. O-R-U, omnipresent, understanding, and righteousness.
Get your question, please.
Thing.
We have a lot of people waiting.
It's right here. Thank you. That word water in Hebrew is wisdom. And when you said that word wind, that also meant judgment. When he stood, the water stood up as in heat, that meant judgment. That word wind is judgment. And when he walked on the water and Peter said, "Is it you bid me to come?" When the winds was blowing, that means that was also judgment. And then Jesus came walking in the wisdom of God, or SOD, or secrets of divinity, and rebuked the wind and said, "Peace, be still." Thank you for your time.
Well, as opening of John says, and as the Bible says, almost 5 years earlier, maybe a bit more, abracadabra, abracadabra, abracadabra. I will create as I speak. It's straight Hebrew. Magicians say it also, but they took it from God. Abracadabra.
Evil, you may need to turn on the mic.
No, I won't. I'll speak aloud. You know, I hate infos. They've really betrayed me so many times. Here's my profile, and half to you, half to you. Great pleasure being with you.
Thank you.
I teach Shakespeare at Grand Valley. And in one of my dreams, he told me, yes, there was a monkey. The monkey didn't, finish that sonnet. So, anyway.
He didn't write it. You mean, oh, wow, no, Shakespeare.
It was a miracle. Now, I have a question, a childish question, but from the mouth of babes, of course, occasionally wisdom comes. I agree with you totally. Wisdom is a wonderful concept. It's not only that it is here on this side, but we are enveloped in that wisdom entirely. This childish question is, when did this wisdom come into existence, and is it ever going to disappear?
Well, if you mean existence in the physical, in the universe, if you mean existence in the universe, it comes with the creation of the universe. If you mean ever, it's eternal, because the wisdom is the expression of God's force in this world. So if we take the biblical understanding and that wisdom, or even the secular understanding, it predates time. So it's a bad word, eternal, because eternal sounds like it's time. So it's best to say it's timeless. That is to say, it's not bound by time. It exists outside of time and also inside of time. Just like light beams can be outside of time at the speed of light, but they can actually condense, thanks to Einstein, and become solid matter, and then they are inside of time. So this.
And again, the question is similar to the one you received earlier, but where was wisdom before the creation of time?
In God.
Okay.
In God.
Thank you.
Is it John?
I'm a psychologist, and I'm interested in the mind-body problem. And I recently read a book by a professor from Berkeley, Terrence Deacon, entitled The Incomplete Universe, The Emergence of Mind from Matter. And he makes the case quite convincingly. I'm not trained as a physicist, so I don't know how to evaluate this, but quite convincingly that mind is an emergent. We can never understand it by reducing it back down to atoms and so forth. And it seems that his argument would be consistent with a tops-down argument for God and creation, but he also seems very respectful of a neo-Darwinian viewpoint of selection and so forth. And I just wonder if anyone on the panel has read that book, or if others in the audience, whether there is a kind of consistency about a certain form of neo-Darwinism that would be consistent with a God who created an orderly universe.
Put it like this. Here we go. It's like that. Darwinian evolution demands that the mutations be random. Okay. The selection, everyone knows, is not random. The strong lions eat weak lions. That's not random. But the mutations that make one lion stronger than another have to be random. If they're not random, then it's not evolution. It's development. I would not hold by I don't think the fossil, even the late Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard, who was adamantly in favor of Darwinian evolution, in writing, read his writings. Professor of paleobiology at Harvard University, along with Niles Eldridge, the two of them that did punctual evolution, wrote the following in writing: the pattern that we were told to find in the fossil record since Charles Darwin does not exist. It doesn't. Those are two people who have no interest in God whatsoever. I don't know about Stephen Jay Gould now. Stephen, you want to give us an answer? He died of cancer about 4 or 5 years ago. But I spent time with him. He didn't need God, but he says but the fossil record does not confirm neo-Darwinian evolution. These leaps and bounds, it doesn't mean that it requires a God. It just means we don't understand evolution. Eventually that might require God. But remember, neo-Darwinian evolution insists that the mutations be random. And as you see in the books there, I'm fond of quoting Darwin's closing lines of The Origin of Species, except for the very first edition, which was followed by major changes by the second edition. About less than 6 months later, the second edition came out with huge, very major alterations. Darwin had to rush into print, right, to beat Wallace. He didn't want to lose his place in history. So he rushed into print. Then he had to make changes. So if you get past the first edition, all other editions, Darwin writes that the Creator, with a capital C, put the forces into nature that allowed life to evolve. Now people say, well, it's because his wife. You can't use that. You think because his wife, was he going to stop giving chicken soup or something? He says it, except the first publication, all other editions, and the second, as it comes out within half a year after the first, have the fact in the closing lines. He says that, and in the introduction also, but the closing lines are the most dramatic, that the Creator put the forces into a few forms of life that allowed life to evolve as it did. So even Darwin talks about a tweaking of the system. Neo-Darwinian evolution doesn't allow that. So Neo-Darwinian evolution doesn't agree with Darwin.
Okay. We're running out of time. We have 5 questions. Let's make them real short and try to keep the answers real short so we can give you all a chance, but we're not going to be able to take any more. It should be turned on now.
Okay, hi. I'm an anthropologist over at Grand Valley State, and I teach comparative religions, and I study religion in my work. But I like reading theoretical physics for my own religious edification. I was curious, I've been reading some Bernard Aish. You might be familiar with Bernard Aish. And he talks about the quantum field and this kind of underlying energy, which he seems to equate with consciousness. I was curious about that, and also about your comment about the Time magazine announcement that once heat death happens, we'll have unbodied consciousness. What did you mean by unbodied consciousness?
Well, from a brain-mind idea that the brain would be gone, at the death of a person, you then again, once again, have unbodied consciousness. That, in other words, that this aspect of consciousness is not emergent. That's where different. It's not emergent. That's where Wald makes this different. On consciousness, it's the exact opposite. It's consciousness or mind gives rise to the physical world. That's what this diagram says. It's not emergent. It's the exact opposite. That physical world is emergent from it, which is very hard to. But as an anthropologist, I might say one thing very quickly. The fact that a museum says that people go back 70,000 years and invented tools 50,000 years ago, invented farming 10,000 years ago, the museum is 100% correct by its definition of a person and a human. The museum's definition of a human is a being that looks like you, has your intelligence, that's it. The biblical definition of a human is a person that looks like you, has your intelligence, and an neshama. The verse 27, the creation of the Spirit of God, the soul of human soul, put it that way. So the museums are correct, and we're correct. And the late head of the school where I teach, Rabbi Noach Weinberg, said, if you can have a discussion, first define your terms. The museum, I want to make that clear. People, by the museum's definition, go back 70,000 to 80,000 years, and they are 100% correct by their definition of a person. But by the Bible's definition of a person, people go back less than 6,000 years. Of course, although Homo sapiens sapiens go back tens and tens and tens of thousands of years, Homo sapiens sapien monotheistium goes back. That's not my term, but it's a nice term actually. The neshama.
The polytheist next to you doesn't look happy about it.
Beg your pardon? What was that?
Nothing. I was just pointing out that Fred's a polytheist, so sort of. No. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, Tim.
Sir, with regard to wisdom being at the kind of the ultimate beginning, would you mind engaging in a fictitious conversation or back and forth with Einstein? If he were here, what would he say to this presentation? And give yourself the last word. What would you say back to him?
I imagine he would say, I made bad mistakes in the past, besides getting divorced. But he made bad mistakes in the past. He thought he changed his famous equation to make a static universe, and we discovered that he had actually predicted the creation of the universe. And if he can have a creation of the universe from nothing, I think he would accept the fact that something predates it, and if it's not, and it looks like they've been. I would say that Einstein would look in the world. Well, I know what he would say. As a matter of fact, I know this only because my wife, Barbara Sofer. You look up barbarasofer.com. She's phenomenal. Great writer. I mean, really, she's phenomenal. Every 2 weeks she has an article in the Jerusalem Post on the Friday, Human Spirit. Anyway, Barbara was interviewing a former mayor of Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek. Teddy Kollek, at the founding of the State of Israel, was the chief of staff for David Ben-Gurion. That is not military, but the person that travels with the president. So Barbara asked Teddy Kollek, what happened when Einstein and Ben-Gurion met? They met only once. And the story was like this. Kollek didn't remember. He went to his archives and pulled out his text where he kept notes, and they were driving from Washington to New York. It's interesting, the 50s. Driving from Washington to New York, and they were 2 hours ahead of schedule. Ben-Gurion said, I would like to meet Albert Einstein as they passed Princeton. Zip, they went, they met with Einstein. And according to the notes, right from that Teddy Kollek was reading, the entire conversation, which might have been about weaponry considering the enemy countries around, but it wasn't. The entire conversation centered on whether there's a force in the world tweaking the system. And both Ben-Gurion and Einstein, according to the notes by Teddy Kollek, said there's no question that there's something in the system that is beyond the physical that's interacting. David Ben-Gurion said it perfectly. If you live in Israel and you don't believe in miracles, you're not a realist.
So we know what Einstein would say, and obviously we don't need a response. So
we all came here today because we're interested in science and we're interested in God. On the sixth day, the entity, the power, the Yahweh said, let us make Adam in our own image, or humankind. Can you share something about the intentionality of wisdom and what that might be so we can know that God better?
Oh, well, I would just say that the neshama brings us the information. We have two souls. Verse 21, God creates the animals. That's the nefesh, the soul of animal life. Then the other, it's not physical, it's spiritual. Then the verse 27 is the neshama, the soul of human life. All humans have a nefesh and a neshama. All animals only have a nefesh. Animals don't worry about throwing the garbage in the street. Humans should worry, because the neshama says, what are you doing? Why you throw that piece of garbage in the street? Other people walk here. The nefesh says the following: I don't care. I don't want the garbage in my pocket, so I throw it in the street. And the neshama says, but you try to act like a human being. So this information that we're given through these souls that we have allow us to know that the universe is entangled, to put it that way, that is all enveloped, and that in that entanglement, everything that a person does, like throwing the garbage in the street, affects other beings as well. And every time a person listens to the neshama that knows there's a God, a oneness in the world, the neshama knows, hear, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, or Mark, I think it's Mark chapter 29. Jesus says the most important sentence. That there's a oneness in the world, not just there's one God, that's simple meaning. That there's the world is entangled, and every time you throw your garbage in the street, whether it's a cigarette butt or dumping your laundry on the garbage on the street, you move away from God.
So in that way, God still speaks to us today?
Well, the neshama wants to be close to God.
Yeah.
The nefesh wants to have a nice, easy life.
Thank you.
If I also may add another comparison, in Hindu Dharma, we have Atman and Ahankara, soul and pseudo-soul. Atman is the one who keeps the garbage until there's a container. And Ahankara is the one who says, I'm in it for me, and if I'm more comfortable throwing it out, I'm there. And by keeping the Atman, foremost in our consciousnness, we become more godlike.
It's not surprising that there's this overlap, because if mind is in fact if everything is an emergence from this divine mind, well, we're all part of it. It's not like one's got it and the other doesn't have it.
Right.
It's at the bottom of the cup. There's God.
Last two questions, real quick.
First of all, thank you for that excellent metaphor with the microphones and the static of how difficult it is for us to reason through the static of human presuppositions. But one problem with a oscillating universe is that the universe has the resonance of a medicine ball. And I just wanted to comment that to you. But my question is, when I've talked to people, whether they're atheists or evolutionists or Christians or people of other faith, basic questions they take as personal attack against their closest presuppositions, their closest beliefs. Anybody who has loose change has the evidence of the impossibility of blind random chance creating the universe. We have the random chance of left to right amino acids. It's over 10 to the power of 113,000 to get the simplest life form.
Your question, please.
The question is, have you found a greater willingness of evolutionists who respond with religious fervor against questioning their presuppositions, a cracking of their closely held beliefs and blind faith, and things that people are beginning to say the data does not support?
It's been my experience in conversations, but that may have been, it's clear not universal, is that biologists have a bigger stake in randomness than physicists have. Okay? That, in other words, biologists, it's my experience, but I'm not saying that it's the case for all biologists or all physicists. That physicists are more readily exposed to this amazingness of what quantum physics is all about, whereas most biologists, I don't know why, but that's the case. Did I reply?
So the answer is no.
Your question? What?
So, no.
No, I didn't. So biologists are more reluctant. It's my experience that biologists have been more reluctant to accept the fact that there's a tweaking of the system than physicists are reluctant. Okay?
Last question.
I'd like to say I really appreciate the presentation. I'd like to, if you could talk just a little bit more about time. One thing you mentioned briefly today and is expounded in Science of God, which I first read as a freshman undergraduate and kind of set my thinking on its head, which is a good thing. And as your comment, your concept there, as I understand it, is that and you mentioned today, the first 6 days of the beginning, the evening and the morning, are kind of measured from a time perspective external to our universe.
No.
No, okay.
Internal to the universe, but seeing time from the beginning, looking forward.
Say that again a little more, if you would. I'm not totally following.
Well, we can't get, but you will follow if you go to my website and just look up the article on the ancient order on the Science of God, where I have 2 chapters on it. But there are 2 perspectives of time. They're both within the universe, and it's not relativity, and it's not gravity. It is the stretching of space. And any astronomers in the group, any astronomers here today? When you take data when you look at information coming from deep space that's far from you, that information has to come to you through space. As it comes to you through space, the universe is not static. The universe is getting larger. How? By space stretching. The universe does not get larger by new layers like an onion or a cabbage or a lettuce, adding on. The universe gets larger by space stretching. Figure out that one will beat you in Stockholm. Okay, so the galaxies move apart. But what does that mean? When timing of events come, you observe an event at a great distance. By the time that information reaches you, it has gone through space, and the further away it is from you, the more the stretching, and so the perception of the time is totally distorted. The Torah, according to Nachmanides, because the text says day number 1 and not a first day, sees time from the only time where there wasn't a second day. So it cannot see time from Sinai, because if you add up the years from Adam to Sinai, there are approximately 900,000 days, okay? So for the first 6 days, Nachmanides, almost 1,000 years ago, and others besides him, but he's the major, says that the Torah sees time, the fact that the Torah says the evening and morning 1 day, or day 1, as opposed to a first day, means that there hadn't been a second day. Therefore, the only time where there hadn't been a second day is seeing time from the beginning. Now, why that should interest a person almost 1,000 years ago, I don't have a clue. Time is time, so we thought, and then we discover it's not. So the perception, the Hebrew word, the operation word is perception of time from the beginning looking forward of all these events that occur up to Adam. With the creation of Adam, the Torah abandons this point of view and takes on an earth-based point of view. How do we know that? Because the description of time from Adam forward is Adam and Eve live 130 as a kid named Seth lives it. It's earth-based. So there are 2 perceptions of time. We look back in time, the billions of years went by. There are 14 billion years. I have no problem. In fact, the actual number is startling in the actual type of number because it relates amazingly to a concept in Kabbalah. But anyway, it's really 13.7 billion. The way you write that in Oriental numbers, which is not base 6, but it's base 4, you write 137, and then the zeros after it. 137 just happens to be the most basic number of all physics, and the most basic number of all Kabbalah. Now, whether that's the case of coincidence, it might be coincidence. But nonetheless, there are 2 perspectives of time. When you look forward from the beginning, you have to earn all the information back. It's totally a thought experiment, and that compresses it. Just when you go back in time, mathematically, the universe gets smaller, so things compress, and time is one-on-one. It has nothing to do with Schroeder, nothing to do with even Nachmanides. Every astronomer knows that. Every measurement we make from deep space, we correct for the stretching of the information. It's called the redshift, whereas red is a long wavelength. A blue star that's billions of miles away from us won't look blue when it gets here, the light gets here, because the blue is a short wavelength, and they're all short, but relatively short. So that wavelength is stretched out, and the blue becomes towards the red end. So it's called the redshift.
Well, we've had a very stimulating morning. We've had a very stimulating morning, and it will only continue as you attend breakout sessions. There are 12 options for you, 2 different sessions, 6 the first and 6 the next one. I encourage you to find one of interest. Some of you were inquiring about lunches. It turns out we have plenty of lunches. If you didn't order one ahead of time, you can stop at the book table and see Whitney, my assistant, and for $5 you can have a lunch. We've got plenty available. Please stop there. And other than that, I want to remind you to fill out your evaluation. If you're going to be here this afternoon, keep it so you can evaluate the afternoon sessions. If you're not, please evaluate the morning session. I want to thank Fred and Shell and, of course, our guest, Gerald Schroeder, and thank you for attending.